Hi, my name is Chan Wang, and this is my final portfolio project for Psychology 1101. My presentation is separated into 5 parts: Portfolio 1, Portfolio 2, Portfolio 3, Common Theme, and Interesting Findings. For Portfolio 1, my topic is how childhood shadow affects humans' mental health. Because childhood shadow is ubiquitous in the society, as many children experience something negative, like bullying, sexual abuse, and accidents. And from the research, childhood trauma affects 7.7 million adults, nearly 3.5% of the United States population. I want to analyze the effects of those childhood shadows imposes on those people, especially on mental health. As a result, I hope to appeal more people to avoid preventable occurrences and reduce the possibilities of harms to mental health due to childhood trauma. In the article, I stated the relationship between shadow and consciousness. Childhood shadow relates to the unconscious parts of a person. For the influence of childhood shadow imposes on people's mental health, there are two circumstances. If someone can heal the shadow in adolescence, there will be no or little impact on him to adulthood. If childhood shadowing becomes a chronic concern without cures, it's most likely to cause mental problems. Moreover, potential solutions to overcome the negative effects was discussed. Scientific approaches like cognitive behavioral therapy are attainable. Self-regulation process like mindful breathing, relaxation, and meditation are also helpful to develop distress tolerance skills. Seeking others for help is another possible way. I believe this research is important because childhood shadow is a common phenomenon not only influences teenagers who might experience sexual, emotional, and physical abuse, but also impacts adults who can't step out of the shadow. Their daily lives will be significantly affected. Also, it's crucial to stay mentally healthy to maintain common lives. For application, as we know that if childhood trauma is healed in adolescence, there is little impact to adults. As a result, doctors can treat patients as early as possible to prevent the future impacts. Also, if someone gets some mental disease and behaves abnormally, and it is hard to find the pathogeny, doctors can retrieve patients' childhood memories, and childhood trauma might be the origin. And here is my portfolio too. My topic is, can classical conditioning treat phobia? I'm very interested in classical conditioning because it emphasizes the importance of learning from the environment and support nurture over nature. Also, phobia is a common disorder in daily lives. I was wondering whether they could be connected, like how classical conditioning functions to treat phobia. In Portfolio 2, I demonstrated the concepts of classical conditioning and its three main phases: before conditioning, during conditioning, and after conditioning, with specific examples. Then I studied how it relates to people's phobia, and not only showed that classical conditioning is effective to treat the phobia, but also clarified that classical conditioning may lead to the acquisition of phobia in some situations. This topic is essential because classical conditioning accompanied by everyone in daily lives. There are conceivable effects including both positive and negative consequences, which is worthwhile to study. To apply those knowledges outside of the classroom, counter-conditioning is an effective way to treat phobia, as classical conditioning is deterministic. When people adapt to the behavior through learning from classical conditioning, there is a threat that they will lose control because it doesn't follow individuals' wills. People can change the environment to avoid negative consequences. And here is my portfolio 3. My topic is, can personality traits predict depression? According to the data, as depression impacts more than 16.1 million American adults, about 6.7% of the United States population. It becomes a severe issue in a society. Everyone grows up with his or her own personality traits, with a variety of distinctions, and expected to study whether personalities could be utilized to analyze depression, even predict depression. Also, if personalities can successfully predict depressive symptoms, scientists could conduct experiments to apply this feature in real life, like treatments for patients. In Portfolio 3, I studied the concepts of depression and disorders as well as Big Five in personality traits: openness, consciousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism. In the following passage, I mainly introduced how neuroticism level and consciousness level effectively help to predict depression. Also, I proposed the exceptions and limitations of this method. Then, I stated the applicability of predicting by personality traits. This topic is significant because depression becomes the main disorder existing among different stages of people, including adolescents, adults, and elders. Effective solutions are needed to address the problem. Also, personality traits differ from person to person. It's meaningful to analyze the impacts and obtain the feedback from all kinds of people and obtain a general conclusion. For application, as personality traits are effective to predict future depression, it's feasible to reduce vulnerability to prospective depression. Using the Big Five models, including openness, consciousness, extroversion, agreeableness, and neuroticism, scientists and doctors are able to predict the trend of depression of development, like whether the condition will worsen, and make plans to treat depression or relieve the deteriorating rates. I discovered subtle commonalities among those topics. As for the first portfolio, how childhood shadow affects humans' mental health, I discussed the relationship between shadow and consciousness and the influence that childhood shadow imposes on people's mental health and potential solutions to overcome the negative effects. And in the second portfolio, can classical conditioning treat phobia? I analyzed the concept of classical conditioning and how it relates to people's phobia. Childhood shadow is a typical type of phobia experienced by children. Both articles studied phobia like the impacts of and the consequences of phobia and the feasible treatments. In Portfolio 3, can personality traits predict depression? And analyzed whether personality traits are effective to predict depression symptoms. Before, I expected that phobia and depression were unrelated, but I found that they both belong to psychological disorders. Regarding to different types of disorders, a phobia is involved in anxiety disorders, and depression is a kind of mood disorder. More significantly, childhood shadow not only influences people's mental health, but also potentially incites depressive symptoms. For interesting findings, I had two misconceptions before. Firstly, I thought that phobia is the same as fear, which is emotional responses to potential or existing threats. However, through research, I knew that a phobia is more intense and excessive that interferes with people's quality of life and abilities to function. So we need to pay attention to the potential anxiety disorders around us. Also, I once believed that to help someone with depression, the best way is to cheer them up and encourage them to look on the bright side. But now I realize that treatments for depression are much more complicated. I would suggest them to do screening and other corresponding treatments. So, cheering up is not enough for a person with depression. Appropriate treatments are needed. And here is my reference list. The second page and the third page. And that's it. This is my presentation. Thanks for watching.